So recent news has been pointing to the fact that it seems like Mr. Vladimir Putin has overplayed his hand in his quest to stop NATO expansion. Mr. Putin attacked Ukraine and attempted to do a regime change in Ukraine to avoid NATO being on his borders. Now, many people were advising him against this. I myself saw this outcome, even though lots of people are saying Russia would crush him in a couple of days. I didn't see it. Russia only had 190,000 soldiers prepared during the training period the United States was watching them through the satellites. And during that period, there was a head scratcher. It seems like Mr. Putin thinks he's in the same scenario as Saddam Hussein was before he invaded Kuwait. Saddam Hussein and his troops invaded Kuwait within 2 to 3 hours. Kuwait was extremely overwhelmed. They barely had 10,000 soldiers. Most of them surrendered. And he took Kuwait by storm very quickly. And he could have done the same if he wanted to destroy the Saudis, wanted to go into the United Arab Emirates at that time. He could have taken the entire Arabian Peninsula, which had he did that, he would still be in power to this day. Because there's just no way they're going to try to block him off the market, controlling the entire oil of the Middle East. It's just not possible. So Mr. Vladimir Putin thought that he could do the same thing, send 190,000 soldiers in, take Ukraine in, maybe in hours, maybe in a couple days, at the worst, a week or two. But I was saying you need a much bigger military. You need a much bigger size of army than this. 190,000 soldiers is not enough to destroy a country viewed in as the top 20 or top 25 in the militaries in the world. So Mr. Vladimir Putin extremely underestimated the Ukrainian military, the Ukrainian morale, and the West's response. He did not think the West would do this. And now, countries like Finland and Sweden, who have been neutral throughout history, are now thinking of joining NATO. And there's an article published by a Swedish journalist says Sweden to apply for NATO membership by June this year. Now, Sweden has a monarchy, but the official and democratic ruler is Prime Minister Mrs. Magdalena Andersson. Now, she's been in power for less than a year now. She is the leader of the Swedish Social Democratic Party. And she's been pushed by the direct actions of Mr. Putin to enter NATO. Now, if Mr. Putin had took Ukraine in anywhere between 6 hours to 72 hours, no one would think about joining NATO. They'd be fearful of the Russian might. But he obviously underestimated. He even overplayed his card in the technique he had. Now, obviously, myself, no military background, no military experience. Mr. Vladimir Putin is a man who conquered Chechnya. After they got independence, he's a man that absolutely destroyed Georgia. And he's the man that, whether you like him or not, he obviously, his war crimes cannot be ignored in Ukraine and Syria and Chechnya and Georgia. But he did expel ISIS from Syria. He put the government back in power in Syria. Whether you like Bashar al-Assad or not, which I know most people don't, and we of course want to see a better pace for the Syrian people, Bashar al-Assad is not a terrorist. He's not ISIS, he's not Islamist, he's not a jihadist. I have always been more inclined to favor Bashar al-Assad staying in power, because if it's not Bashar al-Assad, it's Al-Qaeda, it's ISIS. And that's something we do not want to see in any country in the world. It's sad to see the Sharia law being in place fully in Afghanistan by the Taliban leadership. In Syria, if it wasn't Bashar al-Assad, it was ISIS. Bashar al-Assad, contrary to the belief of most, is pro-women laws, is pro-liberalism at a point. He is very secular. Him and his dad, not just him, they don't have any Islamist beliefs. So him being in power is not terrifying. Where ISIS or Al-Qaeda capturing Syria would have been terrifying. And you could not deny the fact that Mr. Vladimir Putin played the biggest role in Syria for ISIS not capturing Damascus. That's undeniable. I know people will point out to say Iran and the Iraqi militias and Lebanese militias were protecting Bashar al-Assad, but their role was minimal, especially after ISIS got into Iraq. The entire world was focusing on expelling ISIS from Iraq, not necessarily focused on expelling ISIS from Syria, but Mr. Vladimir Putin went in there, destroyed ISIS, and destroyed the entire rebel army. Now, the Kurds, who are backed by the Americans, do still have an anonymous zone in Syria, near the Iraqi border, bordering Iraq, Turkey, and the Syrian government. So they still have some power. There is some power for the rebel group in Idlib, Syria, but it's very minimal. 85% of the population is now controlled by the Syrian regime. And obviously that's not a good thing, but it's better than ISIS. Trust me when I say the Syrian regime is better than ISIS. And I hope no one disagrees with me on that. Now, Mr. Vladimir Putin, if he would have controlled... I don't want to get off topic. I was saying Mr. Putin overplayed his hand. Encircling Ukraine was dumb too, in my opinion. He could have had several military operations to win the war. He could have immediately focused all his troops on capturing the Donbass region. Then slowly branching out. But he extremely overplayed his hand. He tried to take all of Ukraine in one blow with only 190,000 soldiers. Now, many people are like, but the Russian army is made of 900,000 soldiers. That's very, very, very misleading. The Russian army is made most out of conscripts, and he's not going to let those people fight. These people, conscripts, are not people who choose to go to war, not people who choose to enlist in the army. They're people that have to go, serve their time, then go back home. So they're forced to fight. So having conscripts come back dead would be a horrible look for Mr. Putin inside of Russia. Mr. Putin does not give... Let me keep this non-explicit. Mr. Putin does not care what the West thinks of him, what the international community thinks of him. He cares and is scared of what the Russian people think of him. In Russia, historically speaking, it's a very bloody transfer of power. It's not like the United States of America. There's an inauguration party. They laugh and smile, even when famously former president, Mr. Bill Clinton, beat deceased President George H.W. Bush. They had a party. He gave him power. He even wrote him a nice letter, and all things were well. That's not how it is in Russia. Usually the guy in power gets killed before getting removed from power. Usually. Very bloody country, very gruesome country, very strong people. That's how they deal with things. And if Mr. Putin looks weak or has people's kids get killed for no reason, there could be rebellions. It could go into a bloody, bloody civil war. And he wants to avoid that at all costs. So 190,000 soldiers, in my opinion, it was not enough to capture Ukraine in one blow, but it could have been enough. I'm sure it would have been enough if he immediately went for the Donbass and then an extreme, huge bombardment of the Donbass, focused all of his military might on the Donbass region. He could have captured it within a couple of days, looked good in front of the international world. That's it. The military operation is over. We did what we wanted. Here are the two republics. That's it. Goodbye, see you later. You know what I mean? But he did not go for that. He tried to take all of Ukraine and obviously failed miserably. Even though, like you say, who's winning more of the war? Obviously, Russia won more than Ukraine inside the war. Russia destroyed more of Ukraine. Russia has been untouched. Ukrainian civilians have been killed in the thousands. Numbers range all over from 10,000 to 100,000. And numbers range all the way between 5 to 10 million refugees from the Ukrainian people. Most of all can't even come back ever. So obviously in that sense, Russia obviously destroyed more of Ukraine than Ukraine did of Russia. But Russia used to be a player on the level of the United States, on the level of China, France, Britain, India, name whoever you want to name. It was on that level. If not, it was viewed as a tier in its own with America and China. Obviously, it's not viewed like that anymore. I think there is no even reason for fear from the European nations from Russia. A coalition between France, the United Kingdom, Germany, Poland could probably expel Russia out of Ukraine within a few hours. Let's just be frank about this. They will have air superiority in this battle, and they would probably expel Russia very quickly. Now Russia, obviously, even if it does take Kiev maybe a year or two from now, it lost its prestige. United States America, when it wanted to take Baghdad back in 2003, the military operation started on March 19 and ended April 9. But why did it end that fast? Maybe the American army could not have won a conventional war. They had Iraq under siege for 12 years. They had Iraq under harsh sanctions for 12 years. They had already destroyed Iraq's military might in the Gulf War when they freed Kuwait. So Iraq was already destroyed before the war even happened. Ukraine, on the other hand, has been receiving heavy American and European training over the past 4 years. Over the past 6 years. Ever since 2015. And it was even more investment spent from the United States, from former President Donald J. Trump, to equip the Ukrainian army with what you see now. Obviously, the Ukrainian army is much stronger now than it was in 2014. Obviously, the Ukrainian country is in a much better place right now than Iraq was in 2003. So that's the main difference. Now, ask yourselves one question. If Ukraine and Russia are not that far apart in war, if basic European countries, a small coalition between them, can destroy Russia, or at least expel Russia from Ukraine within hours, maybe at longest a week, what's the point of NATO expansion? Just think about it for a minute. And that's it from me. Stay woke, guys. Stay woke.